Today we interview Birgit Lechtermann, also called Biggi. Hello.
Biggi, hallo.
Hello.
I'm glad you have time today to talk to us about your computer journalist history, yeah?
Yes, with pleasure.
I already had Chris Spanek and Wolfgang Bach before, and then everyone said to me, now you have them both, now you have to interview Biggi as well.
Although I think they're better at technology. Let's see if I still have a clue.
Klaus Moeller is unfortunately no longer available.
A pity. That's a pity, a dear colleague with whom I enjoy to work together.
Otherwise we would have made a tripartite conference, but good, but good. Then let's start very early. How did you get into journalism once?
So, I actually started in education because I didn't know what to do. I wanted to study medicine in one of the biggest media companies in the world. I almost said that at Beroshmen in Schinlin Güteschlau. And there came the topic. We want to start a radio club. And then they look for someone who is the same age and who understands the young people. And that was me. And then the show was called From Luxembourg on Saturdays. There were just interviews at that time, still over the telephone. Then the colleague got sick who did the show Radio Club on Saturdays. And then they said, you have to go there to Luxembourg and do the show. I'll make this short. And that was great. They made me an offer and said, you fit right into the microphone. I said, okay. Don't you ever want to? At that time, I already had my own show called Liederlotto in the morning at 11 a.m. And then it rang one day in the show while we were doing a live action interactively with the audience. Besides, the callers rang our phone from the Villa Louvenier from Secretariat, and they said, there's going to be an important call. You got to answer it. You just hang up the whole time. Then I said I'd always get a call from someone who says, hello, hello, I'm the entertainment director of ZDF. And then I just answered, and I'm the Queen of China. And then the colleague from the Villa Ubihi said, if you ever want a job at ZDF, just answer the phone. I said, during the show? Yes. And then I really answered. It was the entertainment director who said, let's make an appointment. If you look like how you sound, then I think we should do it urgently. Then we can also talk about TV.
It's almost a prejudice nowadays.
Yes, but it was so at the time. It was really the wording, and that's true. That would be a real prejudice. Now my daughter would say, it doesn't work like that. But then it was so. And then we met, and he said relatively quickly that we would do children's shows, and that would be exactly the right thing.
Okay, yes, then how does the big arc come to the computer show? I have to say at that time, so I was born in 82, that means I only remember the end of the 80s as a little child, but I know that my parents told me once computers are only for playing and, well, and there was of course the other section. They said computers take away our jobs as teachers and so on. So the time when adults would say computers are important, and it was not so.
Dass so die Erwachsenen sagen würden, Computer sind wichtig und werden irgendwann mal unser Leben bestimmen, war ja eher nicht so.
That is true.
How did you decide to say, I'll do a computer show? Just technically open or...
Einfach Technik offen oder...
Yes, I was at ZDF when I moderated the game program and had a lot of contact with the children and the youth department. And then I met our esteemed colleague, Mr. Moeller, and he said, I planned something with computers. I said, with computers? Yeah, and with computer games and so. But there is a casting for the show. Do you want to come to the casting? I said, okay, completely clueless, and he did the casting. So to speak, it wasn't just about computers and games. It was also about information, but also about fun and entertainment. And then he said, great, you combine both. You can also explain well, so I could go through the material relatively quickly, or use the computer more, or watch the games, and could summarize it, explain briefly and successfully. And I think he was the one who made the decision, and then I went straight to the computer corner.
Okay, interesting. Now, of course, you have a discussion partner, interview partner. How does the planning of this kind of show work?
Wie läuft denn so eine Planung von so einer Sendung ab?
I guess that was a little different from then than it is now. With Ralph Moeller, you just have, let's say he came and has some games under his arm, and then some either Atari Commodore parts or something else he then says, shortly before the show, wow, just arrived. We have to play that right now. And there wasn't such a mega preparation, of course. We knew what it was all about, but we always looked big in the studio and said, boy, that's great. So it was always a bit spontaneous and therefore also very authentic, because I always talked to the computer people and the developers before it went on the show.
Yes, for example, this Werner game that was in this one show in '88 was shown by Feldman Brösel. I remember I watched it and I found it very funny that he meant, yes, in the beginning I found it really funny to make the pixel graphics for the game, but at some point it was too boring for me and I said, let the professionals do it. You'll say nowadays you can't actually say that into the camera anymore, can you? That it's too boring to work with computers.
So I don't know how it looks like just to program the whole day. Although many people find it very exciting. I don't know, but he came from somewhere else. You have to see it that way. He really came from the completely different corner, and you have to sit there, and you have to program silently in front of you. So I could understand that. Yeah, but we also had a lot of creative people in the show who actually designed big programs, and that was very exciting. So first how they came up to the idea, and then they still have implemented themselves, so it went relatively quickly into the games. Let's say where you can fight against opponents. I almost said, yeah, so where you don't play against the computer, but where a community got together, and it was really exciting then.
Did you somehow instruct the guests what they should say, what they shouldn't say? Did you just say then, we just take what's coming and then record it?
So of course there is, as always. So we were a bit journalistic already. Yeah. There was, as always, an introduction, so that was not a blind date. Yeah, that was not so. What's the name of the game? Instead, I watched it before. I like to talk before, and then there were an interview about it.
It's interesting that you see it that way, because Klaus Moeller wrote articles about Computer Corner on Video Games blog. He meant that it was very unprofessional, and so the show was cheap.
Yes, but I think he meant it differently. And in the beginning, I didn't really have a clue what was coming. When I watched TV, then suddenly somehow computers came into the studio, and the technician said, we have to connect it to the video wall. Yes, we have to connect it. If that doesn't have a proper TV picture, then we'll throw it out. Of course, it didn't have a proper TV picture. And that was the first of all, that's so to speak. It has two different things colliding with each other. Then of course we said at some point, wait a minute, here have to come those who have a clue. They also have to connect the computers so that it looks a little bit better. And I think that he meant with a little unprofessional, because we didn't take it. We didn't have any 500,000 euro, as maybe today entertainment shows have to do, such a show. But that was of course a bit like, let's have a look, get someone who can make it.
Did you look a bit to the right and left what, for example, the WDR Computer Club does? 2 years later, '82, started with their shows. They already had some experience. Did the official TV shows cooperate with each other or somehow copied something? Or was that totally self-sufficient?
The answer is no, because our show was also different. We had, for example, 2 score classes and so on in the show, who could play against each other in the show. And as an audience also took part. That was a bit different. That was a bit more action, and it went a bit beyond the actual games, or I say descriptions of the games. And actually we didn't look, we didn't cheat.
That's interesting. I asked Wolfgang back the same question. He also said no, the others didn't interest us.
Yes, you can also say it that way. You can also bring it to their point. I was still charming.
die Computer Corner ging ja eigentlich nur
It
4
was like
Jahre,
the computer
85 bis
corner only
88.
lasted 4
Und ich
years,
frage mich,
85 to
gab es da
88,
irgendwie einen
and I
Grund,
wonder if
dass
there was a
das
reason that it was
so
sold so
schnell
fast, or was the time somehow expired?
abgesetzt worden ist? Oder war die Zeit dann irgendwie abgelaufen?
That's actually the mistake. It hasn't been sold at all. But we thought, actually, we could only have continued new games, new devices to introduce. In our opinion, this had overtaken the concept at some point. And we said, why shouldn't we spread it? There are so many other topics. Let's not just call it Computer Corner. Let's call it Technology. Learning Technology 2000. And then it flowed so over against each other. And then we had really other big topics, not just computers. And that was also exciting.
Ja gut, da kommen wir nachher später nochmal drauf zurück. Aber jetzt hast du gerade was Interessantes gesagt, neue Konzepte.
All
Warst du
right,
dir
we'll
damals
come back to
schon
that
bewusst?
later. Now,
Zum
you just said
Beispiel
something
hast du ja
interesting,
in einer
new
Sendung das
concepts. Were
Robo-Wrestlers
you already
vorgestellt
aware at
von
that
Danny
time, for
Bunton.
example, you
Das war
presented
ja
the Robot Rascals
später Danielle
by Dan
Bunton.
Bunton in a
Das ist
show?
ja nun mal
That was
schon
later
ziemlich
Danielle
krass,
Bunton.
dass man ein
That's pretty
Produkt
cool
vorstellt,
that you
denke ich, für die
introduce a
damalige
product,
Zeit
I think, for
von
that time, for
jemandem,
someone
der
who
noch
still
seine
has to find his
Identität
identity.
finden muss.
Then there was
Und
the
dann war ja noch
game
das Spiel
Robot Rascals, the first
Robot
computer-assisted
Wrestlers
card
noch das
game.
erste
Was that then aware of the new
Kartenspiel.
worlds you'd come across, or was
War
it
das
just,
damals
yes,
bewusst,
there's a
welchen
computer-assisted
neuen
card
Welten
game
man
now?
da auftaucht? Oder war das einfach so, naja, ist halt jetzt ein Kartenspiel mit Computerunterstützung?
So after the show, I always told my father a little bit what it was about. It was recorded, it wasn't live, and then every time I came home, I said we recorded a show again, with these and these topics. Then he always looked at me with huge glasses and said, I don't understand anything. Because it was difficult to explain to the parents, hey, there's not only a Nixdorf computer in your office, there's actually a core computer and consoles that you can play with. That was all very new. And of course, we introduced one or the other program. That then became really awesome, but back then, we weren't aware of that. So we introduced everything and thought, okay, that's just normal.
Aber damals war uns das nicht bewusst. Also, wir haben alles vorgestellt und haben gedacht, okay, das ist einfach normal.
Ja, zum
Yes,
Beispiel
for example,
Bard's
Bard's
Tailors
Tailors
ist ja sehr
has
erfolgreich
become
geworden.
very
Dieses
successful.
Rollenspiel,
That role-playing game,
damals noch mit dem
introduced at
Kollegen
that time with the colleague Heinrich
Von der
Reinhold
Powerplay
from the
gab's da
Powerplay,
also eine
so there was a
Kooperation,
cooperation with
in
such
solchen Themen.
topics.
Yes. So there was already a cooperation insofar that one said, we get the interesting people, also to the interview, but there is no cooperation with anyone.
Okay.
Okay, yes, it is quite interesting, because I remember I had once interviewed Stuart about computer politics. He always said it was hard at the beginning to convince the people to come to the show, because they always thought, well, what's going to jump out for us then? Did you have enough viewers at all? Does the format help at all? Did I get enough speaking time? Was that a topic in the computer corner?
Kriege ich genug Sprachzeit? War das ein Thema in der Computer Corner?
No. So it had turned out relatively quickly in what we show. It was unusual that there is action in the studio, and everyone was happy to come, and everyone was happy to introduce something. Later, it was great. In the show, Technology 2000, we traveled more. We were, for example, also in Palo Alto. And there we filmed too. And there I got my first Apple laptop, by the way. I got it lying around somewhere. I have to find it. The laptop was so thick and with the button in the middle, and so on. I got it there as a present. And because I found it, so crazy because there are still trial phases with the thing. So if you imagine it all, this development has become so rapid. You wouldn't have thought so at the time.
Mhm. Jetzt hattest du gesagt, dass dein Vater und so das immer sehr interessant
Now, you've said that your
fand und
father
nicht
found it more and more
verstanden hat.
interesting
Und du hast ja
and
wiederum
didn't
gesagt am
understand
Anfang,
anything,
du
and you
konntest
said at the
dich
beginning
recht
that you were able to
schnell in
find
neue
your way
Themen
into new topics quite quickly. So
einfinden.
that means
Das heißt
practical.
also
Was there
praktisch,
before
war da
interest in
vorher schon
general about the
Interesse
computer series,
generell über
or
die
was that really only
Computerei
triggered
oder
by
war
the
das
show
wirklich nur
that you
durch die
now have to
Sendung
work on it?
getriggert, dass du dich jetzt damit befassen musst?
The other way. I always had an interest in technology. I used to disassemble my car, a cabriolet. And then everyone said, are you crazy? This was a Beetle. A cabriolet, I said. Why? It has to be painted. So there, I unscrewed it, and so on, and then repainted it. I was really familiar with technology. That wasn't a problem, though. With the Beetle, however, we painted it in a man's workshop. He was a carpenter in a workshop, and anyone who's ever painted a car in a workshop knows what happens. When the paint dries, it looks like an orange peel afterwards, because it doesn't get into this chamber, into this drying chamber. They're filled with all sorts of flies around and so on. That's what it looked like. But I got it screwed together
car
again.
racing.
So technical
Okay, I
interest
didn't
was
know
always
that.
there. I drove car races and other things, so I was already interested in all that. Ford Fiesta Cup, and then Alfa Romeo Cup, and all that, so it was really fun. But you also need the appropriate driving license and the appropriate permits. Let's say, and I was interested in technology, and somehow even the guys earlier. When I was very young, we had a motorbike. They tried to make it faster. I said, "What are you doing there? You just have to drill something at the bottom." And the joke was, the thing got so fast, I'll never forget that. I apparently drove over a traffic light, and then I was flashed, and my father got a fine payment. It said, with the motorbike, I don't know, flash at 80. And there he said, "That is not possible. How is that supposed to work? I just have to go there. That's not possible at all."
Awesome.
And I just was, for goodness sake. So your question was, I've always had fun with technology. Today it's still the same. So I get into it. My colleagues always say, "How do you do it on computers? You create your own presentations and everything else. You're on Instagram, on Facebook. You do everything possible there." I am into it, because it's also very enjoyable for me.
Also praktisch, dann hat man auch ein bisschen Hobby dabei. Ist natürlich nicht verkehrt.
That's of course great, so practical. You also have a bit of a hobby on your work. What does it look like with discussions? I mean, the topics repeated, for example, with computer games, the topic of killer games, violence, and so on. How was it then? That was actually a new medium. Was the whole thing even more demonized than today, in spite of the pixel graphics?
War das Ganze noch verteufelter als heutzutage, trotz der Pixelgrafik?
Yes, so we were afraid. Actually, about topics like war games and everything like that. It was all a bit, but I don't think there was much attention in the end. Because actually, television as a medium was much bigger. Or radio was much bigger. Now, if you look at it today, it's almost the opposite. A colleague was here today. He used to be at ZDF. He visited me today. He said, "Can you imagine that there are communities, meanwhile, in other countries that are so big, like big stadiums here, and then there are games played against each other, almost like the Olympic Games. This is such a mass phenomenon. And of course, it didn't exist in the past, in that form. You could hardly afford your computer. And now back to the core of your question. Yes, I think so. With my experience in the media and the Walla games, not necessarily, I'll formulate it correctly now, can have a positive influence on some of the developments for children and teenagers. Did I say that juridically well? I just think it's unhealthy when young people sit in front of computer games and killer games. So I think you have to take a good look. You have to keep a good eye on it. If it's healthy, if it's good what they do.
I don't know if you said this juridically well, but then I'm not a lawyer.
And then you notice that young people are becoming more and more withdrawn. And then at the latest, you should say, "Stop." But there are also adults who have this problem. They're really game addicted, computer game addicted people. I have a friend whose husband was really computer addicted. They are now separated. Unfortunately, I have to say it this way, because he sat in front of the computer all day and all night. And when you see one like him, you have to say, "Caution, caution."
Okay, krass. Ja, man muss
Okay,
auch
cool.
sagen, in
I
der
have to say
Computercorner
that
sind
in the
natürlich
computer
auch, sagen wir mal, die
corner,
Bilder
the
gut
pictures
gewählt
have,
gewesen.
of
Bei
course,
Bals
been well
Tale hatte
chosen
man
at
eher so
bolster.
auf das
They had a
schöne
nice intro,
Intro
and in the
und im
game,
Spiel so, wie man
how
durch
you
die
sneak
Gänge
through the
schleicht,
halls,
aber nicht, wie
but
man
not
gerade
how
ein
you kill a
Monster
monster,
tötet.
of
Ja?
course. That wasn't
Klar,
shown.
das hat man natürlich nicht gezeigt.
Nein, weil
No, because we
da
looked
hat
very
man nicht
closely
immer
at
ganz
that.
genau hingeschaut.
But that's
Ja?
impossible to
Aber
avoid
das
today.
ist doch heute
But at the
gar nicht mehr zu
time,
vermeiden,
you
weil
could
Bilder
have
doch so
very
visuell.
little
Damals konnte
influence
man
on
ja
it.
auch noch ein bisschen Einfluss darauf
That's no
nehmen.
longer
Das
possible
ist heute
today.
gar nicht mehr möglich. Ich
Because
meine,
every
jedes
child,
Kind kann,
if
wenn
it
es
has a
denn ein
mobile
Handy
phone or
hat, ein
smartphone,
Smartphone,
can get access to
Zugang zu
any game.
irgendwelchen Spielen,
So
an
I just
welchen
think that
Programmen.
education does good and
So, ich
checking
denke
does good.
einfach, dass Aufklärung gut tut
So I
und
have
das
nothing
Hinschauen
against
gut
it.
tut. Also
Gaming
ich
is
habe nichts
great.
dagegen. Auch, finde
But
auch
you have to
viele
see exactly
klasse.
what's happening there.
Aber man muss schon genau gucken, was passiert da.
Was ich interessant fand, um nochmal auf die Sendung zurückzukommen mit Danny
What
Bunten
I
und
found
seinen
interesting
Robot
without
Rascals,
coming back
du
to
hast
the
am
show
Anfang wirklich
with
so
Dan
die
Bunt
Geschichte
and his
erzählt, ja, der
robot
hat
rascals,
Mule
what really
gemacht,
tells
dass
the
der
history in the
erfolgreich
beginning, he was
gewesen
very
ist,
successful
so
in
ein
such an economy
Wirtschaftsspiel
game, in such an alien universe. You have to
also in
get
so einer
really into it to know
Alien-Universum.
that.
Da muss
And I
man sich
think at
doch
the time
teilweise
that was
richtig
probably much,
reinfuchsen,
much harder than nowadays.
so das so
Nowadays
zu
you watch
wissen. Und ich denke,
Wikipedia
das
and
war
you
ja
know
damals
everything
wahrscheinlich
you
auch viel,
need to
viel
know.
schwerer als heutzutage. Heutzutage guckt man Wikipedia, weiß man alles,
That's
was
true.
man
That's
wissen
why I
muss.
always say.
Das stimmt.
I'd
Aber
almost say now.
deshalb sage ich ja
At that
immer,
time, we watched it
ich würde
all,
jetzt fast sagen,
researched it,
damals
put it
haben wir das
together.
alles noch angeschaut,
We thought about it,
recherchiert,
summarized, and
zusammengestellt
how
und
summarized
überlegt,
can I
wie
explain it?
komprimiert kann ich das erzählen,
That
dass es auch
somebody
jemand
understands it.
versteht.
And we didn't rewrite
Und
anything that was
haben
already
nichts
there
nachgeplappert, was
because
es
there are
schon
no
gab, weil es
slides
gab
where
ja
you could copy anything.
keine Abziehfolien, wo man
And you're
irgendwas
absolutely
überlegen
right.
konnte. Und da hast du vollkommen
That's of
recht,
course
das
different
ist
today with
natürlich heute mit
Wikipedia.
Wikipedia anders. Darum
And that's why
passieren ja
there's
auch
so
so
many
viele
journalistic
journalistische
and
und
technical
handwerkliche
mistakes.
Fehler, weil da
Because
wird
the
irgendein
mistake is
Fehler
taken
500
over
Mal
500
übernommen und
times
korrigiert.
And
and not
somebody is
Trotzdem
then
corrected.
10
10 years
Jahre
older than
älter als
he
in
is.
echt, ne?
And that never
Das ändert
changes.
sich dann
If
auch
it were
nie mehr.
younger,
Wenn er wenigstens
then it would be
jünger
fine.
wäre, dann wär's gut.
Ja, stimmt. Genau, das ist ja dann praktisch bei einigen YouTubern passiert, die dann auch
That's exactly what practically
Biografien
happened to
herausgebracht
some
haben, um das Ganze
YouTubers
zu
who then published
berücksichtigen.
biographies to
Das ist
consider
ganz
the whole
witzig.
thing is very funny. Is
Gibt es denn
there then any
irgendeine
situation, any quest,
Situation,
or any
irgendein
game
Gast oder
which was
irgendein
especially
Spiel, was dir
enjoyable for you in
besonders
the
viel
computer
Spaß
corner,
gemacht
which
hat
got stuck in memory
in dem
there?
Computer Corner? Was dir so hängen geblieben ist?
Nein,
No,
ich
I
meine, wir haben
mean, we
immer
used to
wieder
play the
mal
classics
Klassiker
over and
gespielt,
over.
ganz ehrlich. Kong
Honestly,
war doch
Kong was a
Urklassiker,
classic after
ja.
all.
Und wenn
And when
wir
we had
es
time in the
weitergespielt
studio,
haben,
then
dann haben
everyone
immer alle
screamed,
geschrien,
Pong!
Pong! Und dann haben wir das
And
natürlich
then, of course, we also
abgespielt.
played
Ja,
clack,
klack,
clack, clack.
klack, klack, klack.
Otherwise, no.
Ansonsten, nee, mir ist mehr, also ich fliege dann fast mehr an, als wir über wirklich
I liked it more when we
Technik auch
talked about cool
gesprochen haben,
technology.
außerhalb des Spiels.
Outside the
Ja,
game
2000,
sector,
2000.
Technology
Da sind
2000.
natürlich so Interviews
Of
von
course,
Palo
there are
Alto.
interviews
Wir
from
waren
Palo
da in der
Alto.
Garage, wo ich sag
We were
mal,
in the garage where we
Meister
developed the
die
thing.
Sachen entwickelt hat und so.
Such things got stuck and were
Solche Sachen waren
unusual.
natürlich dann, die
We
sind auch
showed there now
irgendwie
Zulu Mess
unglücklich
flies
gewesen.
with the joystick in the front
Wir
and said,
sind mit dem
Look,
Airbus
we could fly this
geflogen,
too,
in einem der ersten
because we had all
aufgenommen,
simulation
20
programs,
Fallschirmweg mit dem
which was
Joystick vorne
nonsense.
drin und haben gesagt,
But he at
guck mal,
least
die
has
müssen
the
wir
joystick,
auffliegen,
and
weil die
such
können ja
stories are
alle
very cool. Because
Simulationsprogramme,
there's just a number bigger.
ja, aber er hatte immerhin einen Joystick. Und solche Geschichten waren dann auch sehr, sehr cool, weil es einfach nochmal eine Nummer größer war.
Wobei
Where he
ihr
at
bei
Technology
Technik
2000 or the
2000 oder
Computer
beim
Corner
Computer Corner
also
auch
had some
teilweise
dry
etwas
topics.
trockene
For
Themen
example,
hatte.
at
Zum
Technology
Beispiel bei
2000,
Technik
there was a
2000
show about how to
ging es
save
eine Sendung
power.
drum, wie man
Then
am
I thought,
besten
but that's
Strom
an extremely
spart.
dry
Dann
topic.
denke ich mir so, naja, das ist aber ein extrem trockenes Thema.
Aber das war gar nicht so trocken. Das
That
war
wasn't so
total
dry. That was
spannend,
exciting.
weil, ja, es
Because
kamen immer
more and
mehr
more
Computer
computers
auf,
came
es
up,
kam immer mehr Technik
more and more
auf. Und
technology
wenn
came
wir
up.
jetzt mal heute rückblickend
And if we
schauen,
look back
wir
today,
waren doch
we were far ahead of our time.
oder?
Das
But
stimmt
that's true.
allerdings, ja.
Or at the
Oder bei
computer
der
corner,
Computer
for
Corner zum
example,
Beispiel
chess computer.
Schachcomputer.
You said
Da
at the
hattest du ja am
beginning that you
Anfang
were in the
erzählt,
department
dass du
store a
eine
week
Woche
before
vorher
the
im
show,
Kaufhaus
and the
warst und der
salesman was
Verkäufer war
totally
total
overwhelmed.
überfordert.
And
Und
I
ich
was
habe mich
wondering if
gefragt,
that's really
stimmt das
true
wirklich
or if
oder
you
hast du dir
thought
die
up the
Geschichte
story for the show.
ausgedacht für die Show?
No,
Nein, das stimmte
that was
wirklich.
really
Wir
true.
hatten ja immer auf die
I
Sendung
always prepared myself
vorbereitet,
for the show.
ja. Und
And
also
so
bin
I
ich ins
marched into the
Kaufhaus
department
marschiert und
store
habe
and
gedacht,
thought,
okay, nächste Woche
okay,
zeichnen wir auf,
next
da
week
müssen
we'll
wir doch mal
record.
gucken, was die da so zu bieten
Let's
hat.
see what they have
Und
to
wir halt
offer.
wirklich die ganze Zeit nur
And he really only had all the time. I think he didn't understand anything. And he couldn't explain it to me either. And I thought, okay, if he can't explain it, then at least in the show we have to explain how it works.
It is then practically that the experiences from real life were topics for the shows.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's how it was. So first of all, I said something wrong before. Of course, his name is Klaus Moeller. I've said Ralph Moeller before. I don't know how either. I was thinking about our bodybuilder somehow. So of course our dear Klaus tested all the games. And then he either hit the keyboard in the office or yelled no, or why isn't there more, or something. And he tested so much that he said at some point that we should take a closer look now.
Ja gut, im Beispiel von Schachcomputern hast du
Yes,
ja
well,
sogar
in the
einen
example of chess
Hersteller von
computers, you
Schachcomputern
even
in die Sendung
invited a
eingeladen.
producer of chess computers
Das war
to
ja
the
schon
show.
praktisch
That was
kostenlose
practically
Werbung
free
für diesen
advertising for
Kollegen.
the colleagues.
That was allowed at the time. But he was good. I must say so, he was worth recommending.
Das stimmt allerdings, ja. Wenn man so mal guckt, was so feedbackmäßig auf YouTube
But that's
über die
true.
alten Sendungen
When you look
gesagt
at the
wird,
feedback on
sagen
YouTube
viele,
about the old
du
shows,
warst
many
eher so
people
die
say that you were so the funky one,
moderne
modern
und
one, and Klaus was so
der
the
Klaus war eher
shy
so
nerd
der
who
schüchterne
somehow didn't
Nerd,
look very good in front of the
der
camera.
irgendwie
Did you see it that way?
nicht so richtig gut vor der Kamera wirkte. Hast du das auch so gesehen?
I wouldn't say that at all. But of course, he was also an editor during his career. At some point, he naturally acted there, in front of the camera. But he was the knowledgeable one. That's what I want to say. He had a good knowledge. A really good knowledge. So when I called him, when I had a computer problem, I said, "Listen, Klaus, do you have an idea?" He always laughed his head off and said, "I'm not an IT specialist." But he knew that all. And I've casual, easily done interviews, and when I came from a Radio Luxembourg, where we talked casual with the listeners. And then, of course, I talked casual in the studio, and also with our guests.
Now I would like to know, I mean, my knowledge does not go back that far now. Have you also had international guests?
Internationalen Gäste gehabt?
I can't say that today. But I have a basement, and if you want to, and if you have time, and have holidays, then you have to allow yourself the time. Maybe 3 days, maybe a week. And then you go to my basement. And in the storage there are all the shows.
Okay.
And I'm looking for someone who can finally somehow put them on DVD or something like that. And then I could say, ah, that was in that, and that show. I made so many shows that I can't even tell you anymore.
Interestingly, I also have an interview about this topic.
To clean up the basement?
Nein,
No, for data
zum
archiving.
Archivieren von Daten.
We will talk to him. And then he can put up all the shows. I still have all the shows, yes. Then he should put it online. So I have to say something sweet. I was at thegames.com. And there were, of course, the YouTubers. And what do I know? They're all game developers. And there were a lot of teenagers and kids out there. And I was supposed to do an interview with someone. And suddenly, there was a whole bunch of young people behind me. And they all said, "Hey, you. Yeah, you." And then I thought there were some important people around. "No, you." I turned around. "You're Birgit Lechtermann." And me, I was really stunned. And then they told me, and that was so crazy. Yes, this Computer Corner show. It's cool, and we were looking for clips and shows on the internet. Because we find it somehow so funny and so cult, the old shows. And there I already said, "Hey, if you really want, clean up my basement. And then we can put the whole thing online. So tell him about my basement, and I would be so grateful."
Super interessant.
That's super interesting. The Wayback Machine tells you what? Archive.org, where you can see homepages like they were 10 years ago. And this project, Archive.org, which archives books and shows and so on, we will talk to the director of the archiving next week.
Da sprechen wir mit dem Chef von der Archivierung nächste Woche.
I would minimize that volume. I mean, it wasn't just Technology 2000. It wasn't just Computer Corner. It was 1, 2, or 3. It was Trivial Pursuit. It was. With the head through the wall. It was Small Talk. On RTL, it was Lechtermann Live. It was, I don't remember anymore. It was Trivial Pursuit, over 300 or 400 shows. It was then Live After 9, then my health show, Lechtermann Health and Life. And now if you put it all together there, of course a mega, so many shows come together. I don't know where to put it anymore.
Can I ask if he had anybody in Germany from his team that would take care of that? Because they've been doing that since 1996 or something.
Somebody wrote to me. If it wanted to, there was a radio show. There was still some radio cassettes out there. Oh no, cassettes. I said, yes, music cassettes. Where you recorded that? Yes, all of them.
Yeah, great. Yeah, awesome. How was that actually? Did you take a look at what the international market is doing about computer corner stuff? Stuart Choff, for example.
So Klaus Moeller screened them all. So I think he didn't do anything else than screening them all. I looked less, but I have to admit, I almost said to my relief, I prepared and moderated all of them, parallel. Then came at the same time, 1, 2, or 3. Then we always produced. And then at some point, the load was so full that you can hardly keep your eyes open in the evening. It was exactly like that. And there it went on and on. It came one show
I have
after
to
the other.
say, I know you as a kid from 1, 2, or 3. Last Chance Over.
And it's really like that, which is actually a pity. You need to have the time, but you don't screen all the time.
Aber wenn ich jetzt mal so denke an meine Kindheit, diese Computerei hat ja immer
But
mehr
now when I
Einzug
think
ins
about my
Fernsehen
childhood,
gefunden.
this
Zum
computer
Beispiel
series have found their way
gab's
into
ja
TV more and more.
eine Sendung
For example, there was a show
94,
in 94,
Schnapp
Catch Carmen Sandiego,
was ja
which was
basiert
based on
hat
this
auf dieses
1985 game by
1985er
Protoband,
Spiel von
Where in the
Protoband.
World is Carmen
Where in the World
Sandiego?
is Carmen
And I think,
Sandiego?
why do you
Und da
catch a
denke ich mir so,
9-year-old
warum
game for the
schnappt man ein
Commodore
9 Jahre
64
altes Spiel
and get a
für den
license from the
Commodore
USA,
64
which
und
certainly
macht da
wasn't cheap,
holt sich da eine
and turn it
Lizenz
into a
aus den
children's
USA,
show?
was ja sicher nicht günstig war, und macht daraus eine Kindersendung, ja.
It was a try. There was a Hugo too, remember?
Genau. Ja.
Yes, cable channel.
Kabelkanal.
Yeah, so right. That was okay at the time. They tried to react a bit to the new medium from the computer and say, how do I integrate it into the television? But I think that somehow didn't succeed. So that was a try. It was worth a try. They probably thought that the television viewers weren't so far away and didn't realize that the game was old after all.
Yes, well, interestingly, Rocco was pretty successful. That was showing up and somehow had 7 different moderators over the time because it had been running for so long.
That was sweet. Somehow, that worked really well.
Which was again a concept from Denmark. So there was nothing that came from Germany. That's my feeling. Everything came somewhere from other countries.
If I was very evil now, I would say there's still none.
There was then, I think, somehow in Sat 1, the Super Bowl, where you have to tell the moderator right, left with eyes bandaged, but that was so time delayed, there you could not win at all.
No, and that made it a bit sluggish too, huh?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the Technology 2000. You meant during the time of the Computer Corner, you thought we could do a little bit more than just computer games. Now, it was so Computer Corner really not only made computer games, but rather chess computers. There you also introduced the Input 64, which was in magazines with floppy disk or with datasets, with programs on it. That was also done with Klaus Moeller. This Technology 2000, what was the concept there? Because interestingly, on the internet, you can't find so much about Technology 2000. It didn't reach the cult status, unfortunately, we have to say.
Yeah, I think if I would upload more shows online, then would that the case? Because I think we all freaked out when there's the first Airbus with a kind of joystick. We also did a lot of speaking, flight simulations. But this was new at the time. But that we were really flying, takeoff and landing, and I was allowed to moderate the cockpit during the landing. Of course, everything was new. It didn't exist either, and I think there were a lot of adventure things going on there for us. For example, we were in Japan and looked at the first automated car production with robots. That was before. It was kept small, and in Japan. It was in full swing, and that was in the show. It was very unusual, because they also said, we will show you everything we have there, and it was fun. But I remember, for example, an adventurous story, in the run-up to this Airbus story with the joystick that we were supposed to pick up. We made a comparison, and there was a biplane open, where the fellow passengers was sitting in front, and the actual pilot was in the behind. I was in front of the pilot. There was a pilot who had the necessary license to fly such an old plane. He was sitting behind us, and we also had a button here in the ear, so that we could always hear what our director said on the ground. And of course he didn't hear that, the pilot, but I did. I always gave him the necessary sign, and we had intercoms with which we, pilot and I, could talk. He had explained to me before, if something happens to him, in front there are pedals. There you can compensate with them, and then you have to fly with them. And what should happen there? I had such a leather cap and glasses.
Da kannst du dann hier mit ausgleichen und dann musst du fliegen. Und ich so, was soll denn da passieren? Weißt du, so mit Lederkappe und so richtig noch, so, ne?
And the colleagues from the direction said that everything has to be with sound. That used to be very difficult. There was such a big recorder. We had to tape it to the leg. We taped it to the leg, using the package tape all the time, always around again. It was like that back then. And today we will probably do it with the mobile phone and say, hey, then we recorded it with the sound, and it happened as follows. The director said, hey, that's boring. You're flying around. There are nice pictures, but you have to do more loops or something. And I thought that was a joke. Explain to the pilot behind me. Woo, woo, woo. And then he started. Short flight. Loops from the front. And then down and up again. And then suddenly, whoosh! It was passing behind my head. That was the sound machine. It is released, and the package tape hit him on the head. The pilot. And he, whoa! And the machine went, ew! And I was sitting in there. No, no, no! The pilot was really dizzy. That was a heavy thing. And I was, what did he say? What did he say? What do you have to do? Pull it up or something. And there I really was, but in panic. And in that moment, he was too. Somewhere, he was aware. Said, and pulled the thing from below. Like that. Then like that, I just sat there and thought, help, help. And then we arrived at the bottom. That was so close to Frankfurt Airport. This cassette recorder, this big tape machine, they released it, had got a blow from above. We found it somewhere. So somewhere there's still sound recordings. They have gone so deep into the earth, but still they lie there.
Wow.
That means there was the show without sound?
No, I had to resync that.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
The original recordings are all still there. In 500 years, someone will say, oh, look at this thing, and says, what is it? Because it was an outstanding flying technique.
Nowadays, you take a GoPro, cut out a helmet, and problem solved.
It's crazy. And if I had a mobile phone back then, I would say, okay, kids, you want us to go fly from right to left? Then we'll do it, but crazy.
Insane, insane. Well, if that was so for Technology 2000, there were already mobile phones, only I think they were as big as bricks.
Too bad I didn't take it upstairs. I still have it downstairs in my office, an auto telephone. It's so big and really heavy, and it has a real handset.
Awesome, the battery was the biggest. You had to carry it in your suitcase. Insane, insane. Yeah, great. And now, of course, the question is, if everything was so great, why didn't you really do more technology shows afterwards, or...
Du hast aber danach nicht wirklich mehr Techniksendungen gemacht, oder?
But there's none now. Is there one where? So that's what I'm going to ask.
Naja, zum Beispiel, wenn ich mir so
Well, for
angucke,
example, if I look at it so, WDR Computer Club
WDR
doesn't
Computer
exist
Club gibt's ja
anymore,
nicht mehr,
but the
aber
one, Wolfgang, he still makes Computer Club
der
High
eine
too
Wolfgang,
on
der macht
YouTube.
noch Computer Club hoch 2 auf YouTube.
But that's a big pity, isn't it? Well, I mean, there's lots of interesting technology. So why does the TV completely ignore it? I don't know either.
Ja gut,
So I would be interested in that. But there is no show for young people. So it would be exciting if there was such a thing.
But isn't it so that young people rather don't use TV anymore? So I know many who say, I only have a TV for Netflix and YouTube.
100% agreement from me. TV has missed a leap. When I look at my daughter, she almost doesn't watch TV. She says, that's not relevant for me. I get everything that's relevant for me. I look at the media library, or I look for it on the internet. So it's different now. But this is of the TV, because also the offers for the young people are just not there anymore.
Wie ist denn das, wie findest du das dann so gesellschaftlich?
How is that? How do you find it so socially? So you have to say that now, for example, the Computer Corner was created in the time where everything was great in Germany, just started with the computer series, but in the USA, for example, there was 83. The video game crash, where even Atari banned all old modules and consoles in the desert of Mexico, which you know nowadays, and it is in my time, for example. I remember in elementary school my IT teacher was a woman. That wasn't a problem for me, but in the last few years there were things like gamer gadgets, where it was said women don't belong in the video game industry, and so on. Sometimes I think it's really a step backwards.
Ja, war halt eine Frau. Das war für mich jetzt kein Problem. Aber die letzten Jahre gab es ja dann so Sachen wie Gamergate, wo es dann gehießen hat, Frauen gehören nicht in die Videospieleindustrie und so weiter. Manchmal denke ich mir, ist das nicht irgendwo alles so ein Rückschritt?
I think there are two things. Women can program games is not a problem. They can do it very well. I think it was more about games that women have created. So classic. In the figure, nice big breasts and a slim waist. A classic. And I think that's the problem. A lot of them said, hey, that's not nice. Then a lot of characters actually changed. So they weren't drawn that way anymore. There's a real upswing. But otherwise, women can handle computers phenomenally. There's no difference, right? Really?
In der Art gezeichnet worden. Da gab es ja dann auch echt einen Umschwung. Aber ansonsten können Frauen heute programmieren und mit Computern umgehen. Da gibt es doch keinen Unterschied, oder?
Ja, wie gesagt,
As I said, it's never been an issue for me either. I only noticed that in the other interviews they said I didn't like to talk about this topic, that's uncomfortable for me. Yeah, that were women. I said, okay, if you don't want to talk about this controversial topic, then don't. I don't force anyone to.
Ja, genau.
Yeah, I've thought that too.
For example, we can take someone like Lara Croft. At Lara Croft, you can see what really happened there. So from FFP to FFFP to a normal shape, has become a bit rounder, has not adapted to the general picture. I think something happened there. But you mean, if women can program games, of course.
Ja, stimmt schon. Ich meine, 97, wo der erste Teil rausgekommen ist, gab es
Yeah,
ja nicht
that's
mehr
true.
als
97,
Pyramiden,
where the first
als
part came
Brüste.
out,
Mehr war ja technisch
there were
nicht
no more
möglich.
pyramids as breasts.
Ja,
More
muss
was
man ja so
technically
zugeben.
not possible.
Aber
I have to admit, but I'll mention the
da
killer
spielt ja
game
auch so
thing
ein
again
bisschen
a
die
little bit.
Killerspiel
I still remember that.
Sache
When I
auch
was a
wieder so ein
teenager,
bisschen
we
rein.
also played
Ich
Duke
erinnere
Nukem
mich noch,
3D,
dass
which
ich
is
als
for
Teenager,
18. In
wir haben auch
school,
Duke Nukem
when the teacher
3D
didn't look in the
gespielt,
homework class,
was
we
ab
didn't care
18
that
ist
we
in
were
der
3 years
Schule.
too
Wenn
young,
der Lehrer
honestly.
nicht hingeguckt hat in der Hausaufgabenstunde. Es hat uns nicht interessiert, dass wir 3 Jahre zu jung sind, ganz ehrlich.
That won't be the case today either. But still, I have to say, quite honestly, today we know, psychologically, assured by the way, that there are too many of these killer games. And that's the point. They're just not good for the development of a child's mental health. Definitely. We know that. That's out of question. And that's exactly what we wanted, to be a bit cautious. I don't have any problems with other things, but I believe that such brutal things aren't good for psychological development.
So if you play it too much, too often, it's practical like with horror movies. If you watch too much of it, you might get fantasies someday.
Yes, but I think that, let's say, shooting movies, stories, it isn't necessary. Like killer games. It isn't necessary. I think there's something else. I don't know. But you can answer this question. There used to be so many beautiful, nice, friendly games. Why did it go off into so many killer games?
Also ich denke, es liegt immer sehr am Genre. Also zum Beispiel mein favorisiertes Genre ist zum Beispiel Rennen. Ja, also
I think it depends on
Need
the
for
genre.
Speed und zum Beispiel.
For example,
Und dann
my
kam ja
genre
irgendwann
was always
GTA,
racing,
da kann man
so
nicht nur
Need for
rennen,
Speed,
sondern
for
auch gleich
example,
noch
and then came
irgendwelche
GTA.
Missionen erfüllen.
You can not only
Und
run, but
irgendwelche
also
Gangster
do some
erschießen.
missions
Das hat
and
sich halt
shoot some
irgendwann
gangsters. That
denke
has
ich mal, durch die
expanded at
Technik
some point.
ausgeweitet,
I think
dass man
through
einfach die
technology,
Spielekonzepte
game concepts have expanded.
ausgeweitet hat. Wenn man zum Beispiel mal Need for
If
Speed
you take
nimmt,
Need for Speed, for example,
der
the penultimate
vorletzte
part
Teil
was
war ja,
always
hieß
called
ja auch
Payback,
Payback,
because
weil
you were
man
just
nicht nur
racing, you were still
Rennen
interactive in
gefahren
the
ist,
movie
auch gleich noch
inside. It was really cool.
interaktiv in einem Kinofilm drinnen
What was
war,
really
ja.
funny, because I participated with my floppy
Das
disk
ist
magazine
schon krass.
for the Commodore 64
Was
Amiga
ganz
as an
witzig war,
exhibitor at
weil
Gamescom,
ich bin ja mit
and where
meinem
the IE
Diskettenmagazin für den
2017
Commodore
came with
64
these
und
new racing
Amiga
games
ja
with
als
these
Aussteller
missions
auf der
like in the movie.
Gamescom tätig. Ja,
I was
und
in the
wo dann
business lounge
EA
as a press.
2017 mit
Nobody
diesem
was very
neuen
interested
Rennspiel
from the press.
mit diesen
Everyone was at
Missionen wie im
FIFA
Kinofilm
soccer.
gekommen ist.
That's what
Ich
it looks
war, ich
like.
war in
Difficult,
der,
difficult.
ich war in der Business Lounge als Presse
The press
unterwegs.
was
Es
expecting a
hat
really
keine
awesome
Sau
racing
interessiert
game,
von
and
der
they thought,
Presse.
we'll do something
Waren
new
alle
with
bei
action,
FIFA
and the
Soccer.
player is in the movie,
Ja,
has to do
So sieht's
tasks,
aus.
ja,
stop some
also
kidnappers, something.
schwierig.
Mhm.
Schwierig. Die
Nobody
Presse
was
hatte ja so
interested in
erwartet,
that,
so ein richtig
and it's all
geiles
repeating
Rennspiel.
itself. Somehow
Und
back
EA hat
then
gedacht,
there
wir
were
machen mal was
possibilities
Neues,
to
wir machen
develop
mal
new
so
game
mit
concepts.
Action und der Spieler
Nowadays
ist
you've
in so
already
einem
got
Kinofilm,
everything,
muss irgendwelche
somehow.
Aufgaben erledigen, irgendwelche Kidnapper stoppen oder so irgendwas. Hat niemanden interessiert. Und es wiederholt sich halt alles irgendwie. Damals gab es noch Möglichkeiten, neue Spielekonzepte zu entwickeln. Heutzutage hat man schon alles irgendwie durch.
Das stimmt.
That's true,
Das stimmt.
that's true.
Also, mal gucken,
Let's
vielleicht
see
gibt's
who
aber
brings
nächste neue
something new.
Spiele, wissen wir ja nicht.
Ja, ich weiß noch, wo
Yes, I
EA
still
dasselbe
remember where we
probiert hat
tried the
mit
same
FIFA
thing with
Soccer,
FIFA
wo man dann so
Soccer,
eine Story
where you
Mode
can
spielen
play
kann
such a
als
story mode
aufstrebender
as the
Spieler
player
von der
from
Kindheit
childhood
bis
to
zum
the professional
Profispieler.
player
Und ich
appears.
meine, das ist
It's
ja
more like
eher
Mafia
wie
with some
Mafia.
bets on with
Ja,
matches, some
mit irgendwelchen
dubious. There are some
Wetteinsätzen, mit
sports
irgendwelchen
betting
Matches,
stories so
wo dann
difficult,
irgendwelche
but I always think it's a
dubiosen
pity that I'm 10 years too young. I think in the
da gibt's
time
ja
when you did the show,
Sportwettengeschichten.
that must have been
Also
mega
es ist schon
exciting because
schwierig.
everything was new.
Aber
There was something
ich
new
finde
every
es immer
day.
schade, dass ich irgendwie 10 Jahre zu jung bin. Ich denke immer, in der Zeit, wo du die Sendung gemacht hast, das muss ja mega spannend gewesen sein, weil alles war neu. Es gab ja jeden Tag irgendwas Neues.
Ja, war auch so. Aber,
Yes, it was.
ich kann heute
But I
nur
can
sagen,
just
ich bin
say,
froh, dass ich mich dafür
I'm glad that I
interessiert
was
habe.
interested
Ich
in
glaube
it.
ganz fest,
I think
wer
very
sich dafür
strongly.
interessiert,
If you're not
ja,
interested in it,
der verpasst
you
irgendwie
somehow
auch die
miss the future.
Zukunft. Also ich bin heute
So
easy
today I'm
überladen,
easy to
mit meinem
handle my
Computer
computer here.
umzugehen und mit
But I really know
Ich kenne
friends who
aber
say,
tatsächlich Freunde, die
how does
sagen,
it work again?
wie geht das
And I think
nochmal?
that's very
Und
important.
ich glaube, dass das ganz wichtig ist.
Ja, zum Beispiel meine Mutter ist ja im selben Alter wie du.
Yes,
Und
to
die
beg.
hat
My
vor
mother is the same age
2
as you,
Jahren
and 2 years ago
eine
she
E-Mail
received
von
an
ihrer
email
Bank
from her
bekommen.
bank,
SMS TAN
SMS
gibt es
TAN
nicht mehr,
is no longer
wegen der
available for
Sicherheit.
security reasons.
Nutzen Sie bitte
Please
unsere
use our
App.
app. So how am I
Also,
supposed
wie
to
mache
do
ich das
that
jetzt? Ich
now?
habe ja
I
gar kein
don't have a
Smartphone.
smartphone.
Nur hatte
She's
sich
bought an
hat sich dann
iPhone
vor
2
2
years ago
Jahren ein
because of her
iPhone
bank,
gekauft,
because it
wegen
was a
ihrer Bank,
smartphone
weil es war
purchase or
Smartphone
bank change.
anschaffen oder Bank wechseln.
Yes, and I believe that in the future this will be much more radical in this digital world. And therefore you always have to make sure that you get the connection. I say, it's just good if you stay with it. I'm very interested in it. It's sometimes the case that colleagues ask me, can you explain this to me? Or, hey, have you already tried this?
Have you
and
already
that?"
thought about it? Would you like to do things like that? YouTube wouldn't be your platform?
No, isn't just not my platform. And I think it's nice, but I wonder what I'm doing here.
Ja, ich meine, gibt
Yes,
ja
there are
genug
enough colleagues who do
Kollegen,
the
die das
same.
auch
For
machen. Zum
example,
Beispiel,
I don't know his
ich weiß
first
nicht, wie
name,
der
but
Vorname
Lesh,
heißt, aber Lesh,
Harold
Harald
Lesh,
Lesh,
who
der
did
diese
these
Terra
Terror
X-Sendungen
X
immer
shows.
macht.
He does the same on
Der macht das ja auch
YouTube
im
too,
YouTube
actually
eigentlich
quite
ganz
smart.
fesch.
Okay, but yes. Well, I could. It's okay too.
Okay. Ja gut,
Okay, you
man muss
don't
ja
have
nicht. Ich
to. I
habe
was
nur
just
gedacht,
thinking
weil du
because you're a
machst ja
media
heutzutage
trainer
auch
these
so
days, if I read it
Medientrainer, wenn ich
right.
das richtig gelesen habe.
Ja, was heißt
Yes.
Medientrainerin?
What does
Aber
media training mean?
also ich bringe dir nicht bei,
So I
wie
don't
mit
teach them
Medien
how to
im
handle the
Sinne von einem
mediums
Computer umgehen,
and the way how
sondern
to
mir
use the
geht es ja immer um
computer.
Sprache,
It's not like that.
Kommunikation
With
und
me,
Rhetorik.
it's always
Das
about the
heißt also,
language,
es kommt jemand zu
communication,
dir, der sagt, ich möchte einen
rhetoric.
Vortrag halten,
That
dann
means someone
überlege ich
comes
ein
to me
bisschen
and
diesen
says,
Vortrag
I want to hold a
und wir,
speech.
sage ich,
Then I
trainieren auch
discuss the
mal, wie er
speech with
den so
him.
spannend hält,
And
dass die
we
Leute eben
also
nicht
train
einschlafen,
how
dass
he
die
holds
Leute
it
auf den Stühlen
so
stehen und sagen,
excitingly,
wow,
so that
ja,
people
so
don't
ist
fall
es.
asleep. That
Also
people stand
übrigens,
on their
dort
chairs
wir ja
and
sehr
say,
viele Menschen,
wow,
Ärzte,
that's right.
Politiker,
By the way, a lot of
Experten
people
und so
hold
weiter.
speeches,
Ich trainiere genauso
doctors,
die Interviewisten
politicians,
aus dem
experts, and so
Fernsehbereich. Ja,
on.
die
I
ich ja
train
selber
as well
mitmache
with my
nach wie
colleagues
vor.
from the TV sector.
Also auch
I
zum
prepare them
Beispiel
for
überleg mal,
shows,
wenn
so
mal
I
stell,
still
stell
do.
dir
For
heute
example,
irgendwo
now
ein
think about a normal
Businessplan
business
mal
field. If a business
vorgestellt wird
plan is
oder auch
presented
die
somewhere
allgemeinen
today, or
Zahlen,
if you want to
Unternehmenszahlen
communicate with the general
kommuniziert werden,
figures
dann wird das ja
of the
heute
company,
vielfach hier über so eine
then today is
Skype-Konferenz
often a
gemacht mit den
Skype
Mitarbeitern.
conference
Auch
with the
da,
employees
finde
even
ich,
there.
sollte man ja schon mal
I think you
wissen,
should know
wie
how to
man sich da
behave
so
a
ein
little
bisschen
bit.
verhält.
Ja, ich habe das mal
Yes,
gelesen,
I have read about it.
dass
If you
man
don't
einen
have a
nicht
cool
so krassen
background, so
Hintergrund
you
hat.
shouldn't keep it
Also
at home in your bedroom. And
man sollte
so
das nicht zu
if you
Hause im
have any interviews,
Schlafzimmer halten und so, weil man irgendwelche Interviews hat. Ja?
Imagine you're doing something
Nicht
for your
man selber, aber
employees,
ich meine, stell dir vor,
and
du
that
hast
would be put
machst etwas
online
für deine
afterwards.
Mitarbeiter und das wird
And
dann
they
auch online
orient
gestellt.
themselves just
Ja?
a little
Und die
bit
orientieren
by
sich
their
ja auch so ein bisschen
bosses,
an ihrem
how
Chef.
he
Wie wird er sich
behaves, how he
beschimpft,
talks,
wie kann
how
er
he
sich
can express
ausdrücken und so.
himself.
Und da
And I
ist,
think
glaube
it's
ich, schon mal
important
wichtig, wenn man mal so ein
when you've trained a
bisschen
little bit
trainiert hat
and
und
thought
auch
about
drüber
it.
nachdenkt.
Mich würde auch interessieren,
I'd love to know how you see have the
wie siehst du
shows
das,
you have made several shows, for
haben
example,
die
Computer Corner,
Sendungen, ich
Technology
habe ja
2000,
mehrere Sendungen
have
gemacht, zum
they
Beispiel
somehow
Computer
caused a
Corner,
mind
Technik
changing in
2000,
the
haben
society?
die
Have they
irgendwie
changed the opinion
zu
about
einem
technology and computers?
Mind-Changing beigetragen in der Gesellschaft? Die Meinung über Technik und Computer geändert hat?
Geändert nicht, aber ich
Not
glaube, die haben
changed,
damals extrem
but I
dazu
think they helped a
beigetragen,
lot
dass die
that
Leute
people also
auch,
older,
sag ich mal,
but also
auch
younger
ältere,
people
aber
dealt
auch
with the topic
jüngere, überhaupt mit
computer.
dem Thema
What is
Computer und so
possible
alles
there?
Mögliche ist
Because I mean, not
auseinandergesetzt haben.
everybody had the
Wenn ich
money to
meine
buy
Mitglieder hatte ja die Kohle, dass er sich
immediately
sofort
somehow
irgendwie
an
einen Atari oder
Atari
einen
or
Commodore oder irgendwas, was
Commodore,
sich ja auch alles irgendwie schnell überholt und
because
es gab wieder
everything
neue
has
Geräte zu
somehow quickly
kaufen.
overhauled,
Dann
and there
mal mit
were
dem ganzen
again new
Thema in
devices to
Berührung zu
buy and
kommen und zu
then
sehen,
to
was
get
da
in
los
touch
ist.
with.
Ich glaube, da haben wir
The
schon
whole
einiges
topic.
bewirkt.
I think we have done a lot.
Hättest
Would
du
you have done
irgendwelche
any
Sachen
things
heutzutage
differently these
anders
days,
gemacht, rückblickend
retrospectively?
betrachtet?
Ja,
Yes, first of all, my
erstens
hairstyle.
meine Frisur.
Okay, ja gut.
Okay, well,
Waren
it
halt die
was the
80er,
80s,
90er,
90s.
ne? Ja.
Zweitens
Secondly,
meine
my shorter
Schulterpolster.
pants. Nope, I don't
Nö,
think so.
ich glaube
You know,
nicht.
there are probably a
Weißt du,
thousand
da gibt
things
es
where you
wahrscheinlich
would say,
1000 Sachen, wo man
ah,
sagt, ach, hätte ich das doch so
if I had
oder so.
done it one
Aber
way or the
es ist,
other,
wie es ist. Und
but
damit ist auch
it's the
gut
way
so.
it is, and that's good so.
Glaubst du denn ernsthaft,
Do you
dass
seriously
Menschen,
think that
junge Menschen
people,
daran Interesse
young
hätten,
people,
dass wir so alte
would be
Sendungen
interested if you put
sketche?
such an
Aber
old
auf
show
jeden
on the
Fall, also
web?
wenn man sich mal die Kommentare bei Computer Chronicles
Absolutely.
angucken, wie die
If
Leute
you take
sagen,
a
ach
look
guck
at the
mal, so
comments
war das
at Computer
damals mit den
Corner where people say
IBM-Laptops und
that's
so.
how it was
Also
then with
super.
IBM
Ja.
laptops, so great, yes.
Gibt's irgendeine
Is there
Sache,
anything, any topic in the show where you
irgendein
say to
Thema
yourself, I
in
shouldn't have
der
done
Show, wo
that?
du
So I
sagst, das
remember,
hätte
for
ich besser
example,
nicht
with Stuart
gemacht?
Chauffin,
Also
it
ich
was
erinnere
always
mich zum
when there was
Beispiel,
something with
dass zum
MIDI, some
Beispiel
piano keyboard
beim
control
Stuart
via
Buffet war es
computer, he
immer,
always
wenn
said,
irgendwas mit
no,
MIDI
people
war,
hated it. It never
irgendwelche
worked. And the
Piano- und
recording always took
Keyboard-Ansteuerung
6
über
hours
Computer, hat er
because
immer
the
gemeint, ah
technology
nee, das haben wir
crashed all the
damit
time.
gehasst, weil das hat nie funktioniert und die Aufzeichnung hat immer irgendwie 6 Stunden gedauert, weil immer ständig die Technik abgestürzt
We also
ist.
had that.
Ah, das hatten
A
wir
lot of
auch. Wir hatten auch
technology
mal ganz viele
crashes.
Technikabstürze. Das war
That was mega.
mega. Also so
So a
viele
lot of technology
Technikabstürze hatten
crashes.
wir, glaube ich, nie mehr im Leben mit
I think we never
irgendwelchen
experienced that
Sendungen.
again with
Aber
any shows,
ansonsten,
but
da
otherwise
du
you
nicht
can't.
ändern. Ich habe das immer mit
You can't
stoischer Ruhe
change that.
genommen.
I took
Wenn
that
die
with a
Technik
stoic
abstürzt, stürzt
clock.
die Technik ab,
Then the
oder?
technology
Das
crashes,
waren ja auch
right?
teilweise
That were
Sachen,
some
die
things
jetzt
which
nicht
weren't actually
wirklich
tested
schon
partly.
erprobt waren
That's
teilweise,
what I
ne?
mean.
Und ich weiß
And I
noch, dass die
remember all
ganzen
the
Techniker beim
technicians at the
ZDF da immer
ZDF.
standen und sagten,
They were always
also
standing and
das wissen wir
saying,
jetzt auch nicht,
well,
ja? Weil
we
der
don't know that
klang ja
now
wirklich
either. There
in der
really was the
Fernsehwelt
TV
kam
world.
praktisch dann, ne,
Practically met the
auf
computer
die
world afterwards. afterwards. And then, first of all, it has to be checked out. Then professional technically, too. So that wasn't all
Ja,
without.
wobei, interessanterweise ist ja diese ganzen Computer, C64, Amiga, Atari und
Yes,
alle
although
diejenigen,
interestingly, this
sind ja
whole
eigentlich
computer
dafür gemacht,
things,
damit sie auf dem
C64,
Fernseher
Amiga, Atari,
funktionieren.
and all of them
Aber
are
ich stelle
actually
mir das
made to work
wahrscheinlich
on
so vor,
TV.
dass
But I
natürlich,
probably
sagen wir mal,
imagine that
unser
our flabby audio
schwammeliges
video signal or SCART is
Audio-Videosignal oder
probably pretty
Skat
bad on TV.
ist wahrscheinlich im Fernsehbereich eher schlecht.
Yes, in the studio there were already such cables. So where you really say, wow, there you start to search where there was mistakes. So we found that often. As long as the things don't happen, like with Technology 2000, we had to improvise so much. With the technology, when something goes wrong somehow, suddenly the recorder passes you by, then it goes.
Und gibt es irgendein Thema,
And is there any
dass du
topic
denkst,
that you
dass
think that you
dass man
could have
hätte
done it
anders
differently, where you
angehen
thought
können,
retrospectively
wo
maybe
du
that wasn't so
rückblickend
good?
dachtest, das war vielleicht nicht so gut?
There were definitely some topics you've mentioned. My show about power saving before. Maybe no one needed that. That could have been avoided. On the other hand, it was a really big topic back then. More and more electricity was used. The electricity became more and more expensive. And because more and more devices were connected to the electricity, I mean, before everything was partly hand moved, so to speak, and then actually the era began, where you always zack. All this was even easier with electricity. So that was certainly not the worst show under the sun, under the TV sun. But I couldn't say now, no, that there were any big mistakes.
Und was hältst du
And what do you
von
think
dem
about the retro hype that
der
has
jetzt
erupted
so
in the
letzten
last 9
9
years,
Jahre
that everything
ausgebrochen
is
ist, dass
coming
alles
back,
wiederkommt,
that C64 is being
C64 neu
reproduced?
produziert werden?
So I can only tell you, I think it's crazy with these retro hype. So the people are freaking out when wait a second, I have to reach into my drawer. One moment. But I don't know if I can find anything here yet. Because I always keep those retro things. Watch out.
Okay.
Look.
Ein altes
An old folding
Blatthandy.
cell phone.
Ja.
We got something else. I need to reach back into my drawer. Look, what's this?
Oh, ein
Oh, an
alter
old iPod.
Yeah,
Krass.
awesome, isn't it? Or to have everything
Die
in
sind
my
ja
drawers is
heutzutage
They're
insane.
extremely valuable now on
extrem viel
eBay.
wert auf
You
eBay.
almost can't pay for it
Kann man ja
anymore.
fast gar nicht mehr bezahlen.
Also was meinst du, was ich da alles in den Schubladen habe? Und das meine ich. Ich habe hier so viel in den Schubladen, das ist Wahnsinn. Und
This
dieser
retro
Retro-Hype
hype
geht so weit, dass
goes
meine
so
Tochter
far
mir
that my
letztens
daughter
sagte,
told me,
"Sag mal, Mama, hast
"Tell me,
noch
Mom,
irgendwelche Klamotten
do you
aus
have
den
any clothes from the
80ern?"
80s?
Ja, da
I
ist
said,
noch ein Schrank,
yeah,
da denke ich immer,
there's
man
a
kann sowas
closet.
mal für
I thought you could use it for a
Karnevalsfeste
carnival or
gebrauchen.
something.
Und dann hat die
And then she cleaned out half the wardrobe. Freaked out because there were original old Adidas t-shirts in the packaging from the 80s. Because I actively played tennis and was equipped with such things. And there were still Adidas originals with such shoulder pads. She said, Mama, if you put these on eBay today, it'll be so much money. But she took it all. I find this retro hype funny, because finally I can bring up my old clothes from the basement again. And I'm mega up to date.
Weil endlich kann ich meinen alten Kleiderschrank aus dem Keller wieder hochholen, ja, und bin mega aktuell.
And things like record
Und so
discs
Sachen
are
wie
also fully in
Schallplatten
again,
sind
but
ja auch
they
wieder
are no
voll
longer
in.
called record discs, they are now called
Wobei, die
vinyl.
heißen heutzutage nicht mehr Schallplatten, die heißen jetzt Vinyl.
By the way, I had the whole attic full of vinyl because in my active time as a radio presenter, I was sampled from all the record companies. And the attic that was so extremely full, I had 40,000 records in the immediate floor. Had such a bump, and everyone said, that doesn't work from the weight anymore. And then unfortunately I made the mistake and told a colleague. But that was 20 years ago. Get the whole stuff out of here. And he took it. I only have a few classics today. And all the discs are gone. But in the meantime, my daughter is the rest.
Krass.
What do you think about it? So she freaked out when she was in the basement and said, Mom, there's a record player. And I said, exactly.
Ja, also
With me,
bei
it
mir war
was
das ja immer
so. I
so,
started
ich
with
habe
my grandfather. He
angefangen mit
was
meinem
always the tech
Großvater,
freak
das
in our
war bei uns
family.
immer der
And there I
Technikfreak.
started with
Und da habe ich angefangen mit
C64,
dem
and my parents always
C64.
said, Ah, in 20
meine Eltern
years,
haben
what
immer
will
gemeint, ach, das
interest
interessiert in
no one
20 Jahren
anyway,
sowieso
and I think
niemanden
it's
mehr.
pretty
Und ich
cool
finde es
that
halt
I could
ziemlich
tell
cool, dass
them,
ich dann
you weren't
irgendwie
right,
denen
everything
sagen
came
konnte,
back.
ihr habt nicht recht gehabt. Alles wiedergekommen.
Aber guck mal, deine Augen leuchteten
Look,
schon, als ich dir den
your
alten,
eyes were
ja,
already
das war
glowing
übrigens
when I
der
showed you the old
allererste, der auf den
iPod.
Markt
That
kam,
was,
den
by the way, the
Ja.
iPod.
very
Hast du mal
first
gesehen,
one.
wie dick der ist?
That
Ja,
came out on the
logisch.
market.
Ja, Wahnsinn, ja.
You saw how
Und
thick
dann
Yes,
it
ist es noch
is.
logical, and everything's still
mit
with
der
the
Rückseite
backside
aus
made of
Metall.
metal, exactly like the
Ne?
first iPhone.
Genau. Genau wie das erste iPhone.
Ja, das ist leider
Mine went
untergegangen,
down,
nee, das ist in
unfortunately.
irgendeinem
It
See,
floats
aber
in
Ja,
some
krass.
hatte ich
sea,
auch.
but I had one too.
Ja, es ist schon ziemlich krass. Ja.
Yes, that's pretty gross. But of course,
Wobei
the
natürlich immer
question
die
is
Frage
always,
ist,
if we look at what's partly
wenn
required
man jetzt mal
now
so guckt,
for some
was
record
da
discs or
teilweise verlangt
electronics on
wird für
eBay,
irgendwelche
it's almost
alten
criminal.
Schallplatten oder Elektronik auf eBay, ist das ja schon fast kriminell.
That's true.
Ja.
But I also don't know why we kept it. As I said, but I still have some old cameras and sound recorders down there, and stuff like that. Because I think it was too expensive. You have to keep it all.
Weil ich immer denke, wow, das war mal so teuer, was will man das alles entsorgen? Davon habe ich mich, wie gesagt, noch nicht getrennt.
Cool. Ja. Ja, man muss auch ehrlich sagen, die 90er waren halt so Wegwerfgesellschaft. Also ich weiß noch als Kind immer so, was mein Großvater nicht reparieren konnte, wurde weggeschmissen, neu gekauft.
Also, wie gesagt, und heute
Today
finde
everyone
ich das
finds it
mega,
mega
wenn
when I
ich
pull
mir mal
something
eben
old
aus der
out of the
Schublade
drawer.
noch so alte Dinger zaubere.
Ja, das ist wie bei Christian Spannig, der hat irgendwann einen Akustikkoppler rausgeholt.
It's like with Christian Spanik. At
Noch so
some
ein
point, he got out of an
Miniatur für die
acoustic coupler,
Telefonzelle.
a miniature one for
Wenn
the
man
phone booth.
unterwegs irgendwelche
If you
Daten
wanted to
verschicken
send some
will.
data on the
Ja,
way,
verrückt. Also, was es da alles so
that
gibt.
would be it
Ja,
actually.
krass.
That were my questions. Great, yeah, thanks to you for the
wäre jetzt eigentlich
perspective
meine
from that
Fragen schon
time and
gewesen.
your view
Super.
of things.
Ja,
Ja,
ich danke
herzlichen
dir.
Dank.
Ich danke
Take
dir
care.
für die Einsicht aus der damaligen Zeit und deine Sicht der Dinge. Bis
Mach's
dann.
gut.
Thanks.
Danke.
Bye.
Ciao.